Welcome to the Sacred Dance Summit. I'm Leslie Zehr, author of The Alchemy of Dance, Sacred Dance as a Path to the Universal Dancer, and your host for this summit. My guest today is Nicole Perry. Nicole is the founder of Momentum Stage in South Florida. Momentum is a nonprofit providing educational opportunities for creators of theater and dance at the student and professional levels. Nicole is also a freelance choreographer, intimacy choreographer, and movement director for the theater and dance. She is a former resident choreographer of Hedgerow Theater, Philadelphia, and the Miami Children's Theater. Her most recent performance credits include Veronica Novak in God of Carnage with Chicken Coop Theater, dancing the role of the mute in The Fantastics with Curtain Call Playhouse, and a piece by Bill Evans for the 2007 Desert Dance Fest. Nicole is currently enrolled in Laban Bartiniev Movement Analysis Certification through Integrated Movement Studies and is researching a PhD at Ocean Seminary College on the theology of the body in performance. Nicole is most interested in how our bodies allow us to encounter the other and the stories our bodies tell each other. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the summit.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're excited to hear what you have to say to us today and to our listeners. So maybe we can start by just having you tell us a little bit about your journey with dance, how you started and how you got involved with dance, specifically sacred dance, but from the beginning.
Sure. So I actually started dance sort of late for a traditional dance student. I was in middle school when I took my first class, but I've been interested in it for a really long time. I took books out of the library, would look at the positions of the feet for ballet and teach myself in my room with my chair as my bar. So I was really into dance, but we lived in the country and there was no dance studio really close or convenient for a while. And so that took a while to make dance an official part of my life. But the studio that I was at from middle school through most of high school had a company that was called Worship in Motion. And it was definitely based in the Christian tradition, but we had two shows. We had like an Easter show and a Christmas show, and we would tour around to different churches and women's groups and seminars and retreats and things like that, and perform this like 45-minute show that told either the Christian Christmas story or Easter story with dance and some recorded passages of scripture and music. And from the very beginning, I just saw dance as part of spirituality. Like it worked right along with that. It was an accepted practice in the world that I was in, that of course dance was a spiritual thing. So I think that was great for me to get that. And even though I don't particularly identify with that world anymore of sort of traditional Christianity, I appreciate what that gave me, and seeing dance in that way as just a practice of worship. And then for college, I went to Eastern University, and at the time they had a dance major. I don't think they do anymore, which is unfortunate. But we also had, as a Christian school, but a very progressive Christian school, and we had a class every Friday afternoon that was sacred dance. And we did a lot of improv and learning about ourselves and our own preferred way of movement, but then also, worked on pieces for formal concerts that would have a spiritual theme. And it's at Eastern where I really began to experience my own spirituality and a little differently and find ways of worshiping that worked for me. But I was also introduced through the sacred dance work there to things like walking the labyrinth and the tripudium and sort of ritual ways of movement as well as concert dance.
That's really interesting. You're the first person that I've spoken to that has actually gone into it from that direction. Most people have done dance and then kind of, go level it up and kind of take it to a more spiritual place. But so that's really, so it's intrinsically just part of you. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was really lucky as a young person that the church that I went to with my family was very much into music, and they saw dance as accompanying that. So I choreographed pieces that went along with, choir cantatas and Christmas pageants and everything. So the church that I grew up in was actually very accepting of dance as a form of worship as well.
That's wonderful. I wish everyone felt that way. I mean, you see that like in indigenous cultures, the dance is very much a part of the whole society and the culture and growing up and, rejoicing in their spirituality. But you don't find that, I think, in most Western cultures. So you're very lucky to have brought that with you. Yeah. Yeah. So let's go into a little bit of just what we'd like to talk about today. And maybe you talk about your work or your interest being in encountering the other. So what does that mean? What exactly are you, when you say encountering the other, what does that mean?
Encountering the other, I've defined this in my thesis as encountering someone who is different than your lived normal. So in my body and lived experience, I am a late 30s white woman with a lower middle class to middle class background. So and I am straight and I am cis. So all of those things are my lived normal. So I could encounter the other as someone who has a different experience in really any of those categories.
And let's talk about your thesis, since you brought it up, because obviously this plays into it. But you're doing your PhD and research on theology of the body and performance. So what does that mean? Like, what are you studying and what are you researching?
Yeah, so I started with a lot of work in feminist theology and looking at the role of women in religions around the world. Um, and then the work in feminist theology led me to body theology. And I'm looking at it mainly from the Christian tradition and Judeo-Christian tradition because there's a little more documentation there and easily accessible documentation. Um, but in the Christian tradition, particularly, the theology of the body centers around sex and marriage and procreation. And I think that's a little wacky because our bodies do so much more than that. So my premise is that the performing arts and theater and dance in particular, because they require us to be in our bodies and physically interact in our bodies, can model for us a different way of thinking about our bodies in a spiritual sense.
And how would you do, like, what would you do? So how are you going to, I imagine that, well, you're not using just dance though, are you? Or is
No,
it
I'm using dance
any
and
kind
theater.
of, okay. So maybe just give us an example of how you would do that. You would do some kind of a choreography to bring people into their body just to have that experience, or
So
is
right
it?
now, my research is based on individual artists relating their experiences of how they have encountered the other through the performing arts. And this can look like a variety of different things. It might be, the person that I'm in a scene with has a very different experience than I, but we both have to be bodily present in this moment, in this experience, and what is that like. But it might also be, that the character that I'm playing in a theater piece is very, very different than I am. So what is that like as a bodily experience to really put on something different And also my body itself sometimes can feel very differently. I am a cancer survivor. And so the body that I had 5 years ago when I was really, really sick, and 3 years ago as I was coming out of all of my chemo treatments, and the body that I have now are very different bodies. And I definitely experienced my body as an other at one point. It did not feel like anything I had ever had before as an experience. So that's a very different experience for me, just in my own spiritual life of going through that. What is that like bodily to no longer have that connection to your physical self and have to develop a new one? And for dancers, I think in particular, the body can be its own other, especially as we get older and we cannot maybe kick our face anymore or triple pirouette and fall down into a split, or go through the
I can relate to that.
we have a very different lived experience now than we may have in our teens and 20s. And what is that like? And what is that like for our spiritual life as we make those changes?
And how do you do that? I mean, do you do, like, what are the actual techniques? Do you do journaling? I mean, I imagine you don't just sit there and think, okay, well, that's what it was like, and this is what it's
Yeah.
like now. So what is, take us through an experience or how you might
I
actually.
have a series of questions that I've asked my interviewees, and I'm still taking interviewees. So if anyone listening is like really excited about this idea, please contact me and help me with my dissertation.
Yes, we'll put your contact information so people can do that. No, that's exciting. Yeah, I think people would like to participate.
So I have a series of like reflection questions or journaling questions that I ask people to complete for me. And some people choose to do that, as a reflection, a written reflection. And some people want to have a conversation like this where we talk it through and can do that. But yeah, I'm particularly looking at in the thesis, past experiences.
And then once you get that, or let's say what's come up, I realize you haven't finished yet, but like what sort of things are coming up that maybe are surprising to you that you didn't expect, or very different than your own experience? That it's hard to have experience of other. I mean, I think for me, that's why I teach, because that's my experience of other, is that I get to use this material or whatever and have somebody else's experience. So I think it's difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoes if you have no opening to that.
Yeah. What I honestly expected when I started doing the research for this was that I would get a lot of horror stories of directors or choreographers like demanding that you do crazy things that you are no longer capable of doing, or that you would have had this interaction with a castmate that has such a different experience that either that gave you a new perspective or that really isolated you because you did not see where they're coming from. And that is pleasantly not what I've gotten from people. I've gotten a lot of character work, like working on a character who's very different, and the physical process of that, which as a Laban person is really interesting to me. And when I teach Laban for actors, that's what I teach, like making choices that are different than your physical presence to make a character. So I've gotten a lot of that. And also a lot of really honest reflection on, because many of my participants are women so far, on changing bodies, and like, I can't do this, but I can do that. And that's been really interesting to just have those women be so vulnerable and honest, but also lovely to see them, at least in the moment with me, accepting their body and finding that other can be a new normal.
And I think being someone who's almost in her 60s, I found that getting older and not being able to do certain things made me realize that certain things were not as important. That restriction was actually, or making better choices because maybe my energy was restricted. So what did I really want to do? Or what did I, so I think there is this real positive side to being restricted that, and I think that's like that with everything. You know, if our choices are limited, it focuses our attention. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, or of, you know, that feeling of, oh, I'm growing older, or perhaps I'm just growing wiser.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes out of all of that, because it
It's a long process.
yeah, and you start somewhere and you end up someplace completely different. So yes, it's always interesting to see. But that's cool. I mean, that you started with something, and we always have preconceived ideas, but then yes, reality can be very different. And I think that's exciting. And I'm sure that it takes us where we need to go, even if we think we know where we're going, not necessarily, but we have to be flexible.
Yes.
So I want to go back to something that you briefly touched upon in what you just said, but about sort of being traumatized by a director or choreographer.
Oh, yeah.
And this is something that you do work with, and I think something that's related to the free gift that you're going to be um, allowing us to download and use. So tell us a little bit about that, your work with trauma.
Partially from my own experience, because I had been so sick. So I did not experience a sexual trauma, but because I had been so sick before I was diagnosed with cancer, and they couldn't figure out what it was. It took about a year for me to get a diagnosis, and I was very much experiencing my body as other. It was not at all doing what I wanted it to do. But there was a lot of physical changes. Like I had lymphoma, so my lymph nodes were literally like goiters in my neck and armpits and everything. So I particularly have a lot of fear and sort of residual trauma around self-touch on my neck and chest and arms in particular. And some of the work that I'm doing, the Laban work in particular, we focus on touch for repatterning and how touch can really guide the movement and help us find sensation, which is incredibly valid and helpful. But for someone who has a trauma in their body, can also be very upsetting and limiting. So I started with that sort of personal idea of my own bodily experiences of like, I don't really like this part of my body. I don't trust this part of my body. And then in my training as an intimacy choreographer, we also look a lot at particularly sexual trauma, because we are setting moments of intimacy on the stage, and that might bring up memories or sensations from someone's past that might not always be an experience that they want to relive. So we talk a lot about how trauma lives in the body and recognizing signs of trauma. So between those sort of different trainings, I've developed this tip sheet that's our freebie of just 5 things as a teacher or a choreographer or a leader of a creative practice that you can be aware of in your students in particular, because we're responsible for them in our setting, and we're responsible not just for them physically, we have waiver sheets for that, but really for their mental and spiritual health. And I don't think there are really any of us that would be okay knowing that we caused a triggering session for somebody. So it's just 5 things to keep in mind and to become more aware, because I think teachers of dance and theater both were used to being really hands-on. Like I very much remember particularly my old school dance teachers, like they just grab you and
show you how to do it.
Yeah.
Make you do it.
There's no asking, like, is it okay if I touch your arm? I'm going to touch you now. No, no, nothing. Just grab and go, right? And I do that even with my little people now, like my little elementary school kids. Like, is it okay if I move your arm to the place that it needs to be? It's important to let kids know that they have agency over their own bodies.
Yes.
But it's important for adults too, that we just have a little bit better awareness and communication, especially in physical interaction settings like dance and theater.
But I think it's important too, obviously from a spiritual perspective, but just the awareness, like to make people realize that they do hold trauma in their body, in their cells, and that possibly like being touched could trigger that, or anything, a massage. You're getting a massage and somebody hits a certain point, it can be triggered. I think there's a lot of people who are still not aware of the fact that that can happen. So I think just to inform people that this is something that does happen, like you said with the children, to ask them their permission, not just because yes, they should be responsible for their own bodies, but also because, you know, if they don't want to be touched in a certain way, it isn't necessarily sexual abuse. It could be something very, very old, a trauma that they came in with, or something that they're not aware of. I
Yeah.
think people are not completely aware of how things come up, and especially in the healing community, that people are not, if you have very deep issues that come up, especially in a course or a dance class or something, this is what you want, and this is what you need in order for healing to happen. But I think people are not being really conscious maybe of the depth of that, or the depth of what we're holding.
Yeah, and I've really noticed in the past year or so, diving into this and trying to work through my own issues, but also become just a better teacher and choreographer. Um, there's a lot of information on trauma, sort of from a therapy standpoint, and there's even some trauma awareness training for yoga, but there's really nothing right now for dance and dance teachers. And I'm like, oh gosh, there really should be. So that's sort of my next mission, I think, is to find a way to make that happen. Like, I am not a therapist, I am not a psychologist or psychiatrist or social worker or anything. I am just a person who is training a lot in how do we deal with trauma in the body, and finding all of those resources. So I need a psychologist, psychiatrist friend to help me
Yeah, but
develop something. But I think it's really important.
sure, but open the subject, and then I think things do. And all trauma is not sexual. I mean, I think we
Right.
do have that realization that, okay, if someone was raped, they don't want to be touched in a certain way, or if you touch them aggressively, they're going to have these memories or something. But there's so many other things going on that we're not aware of as well, and it can be a wonderful journey through the body to find those things, to resolve those things. But I think always the first step is awareness. So if you just create something that brings awareness to that, then possibly other people in the field can add the psychology component or whatever. But to definitely start that conversation so that people can even just become aware of it.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had a lot of workshops where things came up for people, especially the kind of dance that I do, because it's very much energy based, and it moves through the body. So it touches on places that you didn't imagine that something was residing there, and then suddenly it opens up. So I think we have to be aware of that. I guess that's another level of the magic of the body, just in general, is that it can speak to us in so many ways, and to become aware and to listen to do that deep healing in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different dance experiences that can take you places. You know, like authentic movement is something that we work with in the Laban certification program that I'm in, and those authentic movement sessions can be very, very personally deep and emotional, and bring up thoughts and ideas that maybe you weren't even sure were there. And you know, our facilitators need to be very skilled in holding the room, not just facilitating a dance exercise, but in holding a room, and that's a different skill.
Yes. There are many skills that you never realized you you had to have when you started on the path, and then suddenly.
Yeah.
But what about trauma release? I mean, do you do specific things for trauma? I mean, consciously doing some kind of trauma release? The other, I suppose, is more when it comes up, being unaware of it. But what about if you are aware of it and you want to release the trauma?
Yeah. I mean, if you are aware of it as a teacher, I work on developing also like tip sheets and hotlines and all of that, like making those resources readily accessible. There's a course called Mental Health First Aid, and there's a youth course and an adult course, and I think dance teachers should take it.
Or anyone in the healing profession.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have people having a meltdown and you need to be able to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything like particularly groundbreaking in those courses. But it's so great to just go through it in a condensed like 1-day thing, and in lots of places it's free to take the course. So check that out. It's just about getting the resources together and then being able to offer those to people. Is I think everyone really releases their trauma differently, because for some people that staying in that physical experience is going to be really helpful. And there's some people that are not going to have the capacitance for that in that moment. And so everybody's trauma experience is different. So everybody's trauma release experience is going to be different. And as a facilitator of dance experiences, you know, we need to be aware of that too, that even if we've successfully navigated someone through an experience before, the next time that may not be true, and we need a variety of ways of dealing with that.
Yes, no two people are the same. And the levels of your own experience are not the same. I think once you release part of the trauma, then even with the same student, you may reach a whole new level of it and need different skills to take you through that piece of it.
Yeah, and for me personally, like just accepting the fact that I really did have a physical and psychological trauma from my illness was a really big step for me. Like once I could actually name it and claim it and identify it, then I could start to take concrete steps to heal it. Some people immediately know that they've had a trauma and can go from there. Some people have to come to grips with the fact that they've had one first.
Those people who can rise above the everything or power through, those are the ones that have to go back and realize, okay, I powered through in the moment, that was great, but now it's time to go back and heal this. Yeah. But again, that's what gives you integrity. I mean, you walk the talk, you've lived this experience. So I think that if every person would just take the experiences that they live and make that their vocation in life to heal themselves, and then use that information to help other people, that would be, we would have everything, and from a very experiential place. So let me ask you about being an intimacy choreographer. What does that entail? That sounds interesting.
It's super interesting. So intimacy choreography is a newish term in sort of the public eye, but it actually began in about 2000, well, the early 2000s, because Tonya Sina, who's the founder of Intimacy Directors International, wrote her master's thesis on this work in 2004. So it's been around for a while. It's just becoming really sort of recognized now because of the Me Too movement. And the idea of intimacy direction or intimacy choreography is that we have people trained in movement that set dances for stage, and we have people trained in a different specific kind of movement that set violence for stage. But we have not, up until the last few years, had people trained in specific movement that would set sexual, intimate, romantic, physically interactive moments on stage that are not dance or violence. Which, when you break it down like that, you kind of go, that's wild. Like, of course we set dances, of course we set fights. People could get hurt. We want them to look good. We want them to tell the story of the theater piece, or they convey the idea of the dance piece. Like, obviously we're going to set them and rehearse them. But these physically intimate moments have sort of fallen under the radar, but they can be just as physically involved and intricate of movement, and perhaps even more emotionally involved than a dance or a fight would be. So it really makes sense that we're training people to set these moments like any other moment of choreography. There's an accuracy to be attained, and then we're going to repeat it every night the same way, and we're going to rehearse it together. And my scene partner and I are going to have really clear consent and communication and make this as professional and as professionally developed as our dances or our fights.
That's really interesting because, yes, generally the actor is left to their own devices.
Yeah, and that's sort of rude as a creative team leader. Like, you don't ever let your actor do anything by themselves.
Exactly.
We're like, sit here, stand there, walk over there, say those words. You know, we're very specific with actors. And with dance too, you know, it might really be choreographed. And, you know, I think of Giselle, and she goes crazy because she's not with the person that she loves, right? And a lot of those classical ballets have very tender moments or some violent moments, you know, and those moments could benefit from just an extra layer of communication. Like, the dance world is getting the choreography part of it, but not always the storytelling and communication part of it between partners. And I think the dance world has the same sort of hierarchy, power dynamic problem that the theater world has, which is, you know, the director or choreographer is up here, and then the rest of us just yes and it. And to make their creative vision be true, forgetting that we are professionals in our own right with our own bodies and bodily experiences and agency. And we do have the right to ask questions and ask for what we need and set our own boundaries to make that happen.
And if you can bring something out, then it's always more, I think it's always more, personal is not the word, but more of a connection with your audience. If it is something that you can sort of emote or whatever. So if you can find that in your actor or your dancer to bring that forth, then you're going to get a more authentic presentation. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I think the work is really interesting and really needed. And it's bringing together sort of all of the things that I've been working on in various ways.
It all comes together in the end. And then you create something completely different. Yeah. But that's how we create. That's how we unfold or we become. So good. So do you have any up and coming events? Why don't you tell the listeners about things that you'll be doing in the future?
I founded a company called Momentum Stage, and it's a nonprofit company. We really focus on providing educational opportunities for students and for professionals. Because also in all of the, like, and finding out that there's no real like touch and trauma awareness training for dance teachers. I'm realizing that there's actually not a whole lot of professional development in general for professional artists of like, what is best practice in the field right now? And do you know this? And how do you put it into action? And So that's
Creatives are always left on the side.
we're like, the rules don't apply.
There's everybody, and then there's artists.
Yeah, yeah. And I personally love learning. I would go to like everything all the time and just take class. If I could be a professional student, that'd be my favorite life. But there are in the dance world and theater world, like various, conferences and things like this summit where you get lots of new information and ideas that are so useful to your own personal growth. And this is sort of the same idea, but more on the best practices side and the trends in the industry side. So offering classes and workshops and free downloads for artists to be aware of, these are things that are going on. So we've started our work with the things that I'm most comfortable with, because we're a nonprofit and it's me and my board right now. So I've been teaching a dance for actors class because it's a necessary skill set.
It helps a lot, yeah.
And it's a harder thing to find, particularly for like teenagers and adults, to find a dance class also full of teenagers and adults, that you're not with children and that are addressing your needs as a professional. So it's really geared towards that, helping teenagers get ready for either their auditions for their spring musical or their college auditions, and then helping professionals just get ready for their next audition. And then in October, so this is our upcoming event, October 19th and 20th, we're holding workshops with a lead instructor from Intimacy Directors International on what is intimacy direction. And those are going to be in South Florida. And we're doing one that's geared for performers and one that's geared for directors and arts administrators. What is this field? What does it mean for us as artists if we bring in one of these? How do we know if we need one? Things like that. So we have those two workshops that are specifically geared towards artists, but that same weekend on the 19th, we're having a creative conversation, which in America, we have Americans for the Arts, which is a nonprofit political advocacy group that promotes the arts as a fundable option. So they have in October, it's Arts and Humanities Month, and they promote creative conversations, and they all have to focus on a topic. And this year the topic is, how is the past of the arts shaping the future? So we are holding a creative conversation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on October 19th that's free and open to the public on what is intimacy direction and how has the past practices and abuses of the theater, dance, film, opera worlds. Opera's undergoing a big shake right now in the same topic, right? Shaping the future and creating this new position, which it didn't come from that. It actually came from the fight world, but the Me Too movement has certainly pushed intimacy direction into the spotlight. So we have some workshops and that free conversation, and then we do have performances, and our first performance is actually November 10th in Palm Beach, Florida, and that's with our dance company. Our professional dance company is performing as part of a benefit for Imagina, which is an arts program in Leon, Mexico, where students learn either an instrument or they take ballet as part of their education. So we're raising money, we're helping to raise money for that group, and it's being produced by another theater company in Florida, and it's a group of artistic organizations coming together to promote arts education, particularly for children in disadvantaged circumstances.
Do you have an actual space? Is it an actual theater, or it's more a company that uses other spaces?
Yeah, I use other spaces. So I've been working with this company that's producing the benefit. They've been giving us space for the classes as part of their own outreach program. And yeah, it's more of a pop-up thing to kind of go where people need it. Maybe someday there will be a space, but right now it's more about providing the resources.
Yeah. And maybe you need to be everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
maybe these workshops and courses need to be in different areas or whatever, so that it's
I like I said, I really love learning, and I have found it so important in my life, but I've also found it really hard, to find as a professional artist these resources in the field that I'm interested in. Like my first intimacy direction workshop that I took, I had to drive 4 hours and stay with friends and do all that. And then the next one I took, I had to take an international flight to go be able to take it. So making these resources just more available and more accessible to the people who want them.
Well, that's great, and good luck with that, because I think it's important. The work, you have a wonderful vision, so I hope you'll you'll find lots of people to support that, so that you can take it everywhere.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your free gift. You did mention it, so let's just focus on that for a moment.
Sure. It is a tip sheet for, I sort of created it for like dance and theater teachers or directors or choreographers, but really anyone who leads a movement experience. And it's 5 tips on one sheet, so it's quick and easy, but to keep in mind as you are encountering people in a movement space, of how to be trauma aware and touch aware as we do our work, and to become more conscious as teachers and facilitators, to really provide an excellent experience for our students or our cast or our class or whatever that we're with. So it's 5 easy tips that you can incorporate, but it does take some repatterning, particularly if you've come out of the the ballet world where they've just moved you around.
Took their power. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because that sounds wonderful. And I hope that anyone who is teaching classes, dance or movement or performance, or probably any classes, or healing, whatever, will have a look at that, because that is important information.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Thank you for speaking to us today and sharing all your knowledge and your enthusiasm and your new ideas.
Thank you.
And all of the links will be on the page, so people can hear more about what you're doing and follow what you're doing and connect with you that way. Okay. All right. Well, thank you to the listeners as well. And thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.